This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Years from now, I hope that somebody creates a Snyder cut of this show where they highlight the real heroes and put everything in slow motion. Here's what we got for y'all. Identitarian groups oppose migrants and anyone who isn't white, yet they say their views aren't racist. We'll go down the rabbit hole with one member and talk to folks keeping track of this ideology. Plus, we take a moment to break down the invite-only app Clubhouse and its major rise in popularity. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Georgia has allowed voters to cast absentee ballots without any excuse for 15 years. But now there's a push for new restrictions on absentee voting and mail-in ballots, introducing new challenges to people's ability to vote. And this isn't just happening in Georgia. In state governments across the country, Republicans are pushing proposals that would make it tougher for many people to vote. The efforts include adding ID requirements and making it harder to remain registered to vote, along with the limits on mail-in voting. The state-level debate just about everywhere has played out a bit like this.
It's a matter of winning or losing fairly. And if there's fraud going on, if machines can be tampered, if people can get hold of ballots and fill them in for other people falsely, then that's fraud.
What we're seeing is when an election doesn't go a certain way, there's now a movement to start criminalizing the processes of the election.
Of course, much of this is in reaction to the widely debunked claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election, particularly from former President Trump. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, there are now more than 250 state-level bills nationwide targeting voting. And keep in mind, Republicans control most state legislatures. On the flip side, Democrats in Congress are pushing new federal legislation to expand voter rights and prevent states from acting on their own to roll back voter access. The COVID-19 vaccine rollout is ramping up across the country as more adults line up to get their shots. But what about kids? Some health officials say getting the younger population vaccinated is crucial to ending the pandemic's dominance on daily life. Some high schoolers may already be able to get a vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine is cleared for ages 16 and older. Meanwhile, Moderna's and Johnson & Johnson's are cleared for 18 years and older. But teenage eligibility depends on what stage of the vaccine rollout your state is in. All three of those companies are already studying the vaccine's impact for kids 12 and older. Pfizer and Moderna's results are expected to be released this spring or early summer. Then another trial would take place for kids 11 and younger. Right now, the hope is to at least start administering vaccines to some older kids and adolescents before the start of the next school year. As of right now, the 2021 Summer Olympics will go on as scheduled. A whole year later than originally planned. But don't expect any international guests. The Japanese government hoped to welcome around 1 million spectators to the games, but with the ongoing pandemic, lack of herd immunity, and the rise of new variants, officials have chosen to close the event to outside travelers. How much do you think Japan regrets bidding for this Summer Olympics? This is the only one that's ever been significantly delayed for a reason other than a world war. The games are currently slated to begin on July 23rd, and for the first time ever, NBC plans to air the opening ceremony live. Due to the 13-hour time difference, coverage will start at 7 a.m. Eastern. The network usually saves a spot for it during prime time, but with all that these Olympic Games have already gone through, why not shake things up even more? The identitarian movement is defined as a far-right white nationalist group that is anti-migration and anti-Islam. But identitarian groups on both sides of the Atlantic, here in the US and in Europe, claim their opposition to multiculturalism isn't racist. They just want immigrants and people who ain't white to leave. Newsy's Mark Greenblatt spoke to a member of the movement and those tracking the spread of the ideology.
We saw a huge uptick in violent extremism in that broad bucket over the course of last year.
Nationally, concern about the rising threat of extremism is growing.
Stickers with the name of a white nationalist group
who bombarded their community with racist flyers
chanting, "Reclaim America."
And white nationalist propaganda about an invasion is quickly spreading. The group responsible for this crop, Patriot Front. They were founded in 2017 and have quickly grown, recruiting in cities all across the U.S.
they feel emboldened.
MESA, Arizona detective Chris ADAMCZYK specializes in terrorism and is part of a national network of local law enforcement tracking extremists.
Shed some light on extremism and ideology.
He produces training videos to educate police on evolving threats.
That level of just in-your-face style racism is not something that I'd encountered in my previous, 16 to 18 years in law enforcement.
Increasingly, he says that extremists are luring people in with claims like these, that our national way of life is facing complete annihilation and that we're being attacked from all sides. It's part of a trending white nationalist ideology called identitarianism, which at its core is a fear of something called the Great Replacement, where waves of immigrants are actually overtaking white Christian identity, and it's helping to radicalize people.
The theory has been widely debunked, but that's not stopping white nationalists from repeating it.
This thing, identitarianism, is it just sort of the same old thing under maybe a different label?
So I absolutely believe that there's a massive change that's occurred, like on a scale that I can't even put into words.
You will not replace us!
Fears of an invasion or replacement of whites came out in Charlottesville in 2017, and now the Great Replacement theory is linked to at least 6 mass murders, including attacks targeting Hispanics in El Paso, Texas, Muslims in New Zealand, and Jews in Pittsburgh. These groups with identitarian leanings have all emerged since 2015, and ADAMCZYK warns the threat is only growing.
Something to me is coming around the corner here, and I have a feeling that we are heading for a great conflict.
Identitarianism first started taking off with the formation of a French anti-migrant and anti-Muslim group called Generation Identity. The group launched in 2012, warning of a confrontation.
Ne vous méprenez pas, ceci n'est pas un simple manifeste, c'est une déclaration de guerre.
New, younger members began flocking in, attracted by a message that appeals to moderates with a veneer of respectability. No swastikas or shaved heads, but the message is white nationalist.
They are very philosophical. They come at you from the standpoint of economics. They come at you from the standpoint of mass immigration.
And they became notorious in France for headline-making actions like trying to prevent refugees from reaching the Mediterranean shore and patrolling the mountainous French border regions. It's become such a threat that the French government just dissolved the group, telling Newsy its discourse has led to violence. But the group's identitarian message has already spread to organizations in at least 16 other countries, including the U.S.
And ADAMCZYK says community leaders and local law enforcement need better training to spot it.
If somebody mentions Great Replacement, I should ask a few more questions about that. The lessons of pre-9/11 actually apply right now. We didn't connect the dots. And so let's now take the time to know that what we're dealing with, and let's do our best to stop it from happening again.
Mark Greenblatt, Newsy, Washington.
As if there wasn't enough going on at the White House, the Biden administration is now dealing with a biting incident. And in case you're wondering, no humans did the biting. This year, we got a twofer with presidential pets. Major Biden is the first shelter dog in the White House, and maybe the first dog to be put in timeout all the way in Delaware. Here's what's trending. Dog bites man isn't usually a story unless it's one of the first dogs doing the biting. 3-year-old German Shepherd Major Biden apparently had what's being called a biting incident with someone on White House security. A CNN report claims that Major has had a history of somewhat rambunctious behavior in his new residence, unlike his 13-year-old brother Champ Biden, who mostly just takes it easy. Both Biden family dogs are spending some time away from the White House after the incident. The 2 dogs are now apparently at the Biden family home in Wilmington, Delaware. It's not clear how long the dogs will be in the doghouse. Both of them have been known to stay in Delaware whenever President Biden's wife, Jill Biden, is on the road, which she is now. If you, for whatever reason, were hoping to watch Tom and Jerry on HBO Max, you might have gotten a bit more than you bargained for.
My lord, this world will fall.
Somehow, an early version of the Snyder Cut, director Zack Snyder's 4-hour Justice League rework, made its way onto HBO Max. Anyone trying to load Tom and Jerry during the glitch was instead treated to an early peek at the long-awaited film. In case it wasn't clear, Justice League isn't supposed to show up on the service until the 18th. HBO Max says it fixed the issue within minutes of it being discovered. HBO is also taking down any errant clips or screenshots on social media, so don't worry, you should be able to make it through the week spoiler-free. Some meta trending news now. Twitter itself has launched a lawsuit to stop a Texas-based investigation into the site. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has launched several investigations linked to the content moderation practices of big tech firms like Twitter and Facebook. Those probes were announced just days after right-wing rioters stormed Capitol Hill. Twitter, like many other social media sites, decided to kick former President Trump off the platform in the immediate aftermath of the riots. The company now says Paxton is using his authority to retaliate against them on Trump's behalf, while Paxton's office claims Twitter's Trump ban might hinder free speech. The site says it has tried to work with Paxton to limit the scope of the investigation, but to no avail. It's now up to federal courts to decide who's in the right here. If you've been online at all recently, you've probably heard about the app Clubhouse. It is an audio app where folks can just drop in and talk about whatever. And it's seen a major rise in popularity, yet still remains invite only. Somehow, Newsy's Cody LeGros has talked himself into the club. Cody, I have personally declined invitations to get on Clubhouse, which makes this question really odd. What's going on there?
Oh, you personally declined the invite in? Wow. Yes. I didn't know you were
Doesn't that sound bougie?
Honey, no. You're hating from outside the club and you can't even get in, and that's what you're doing. So I've been describing Clubhouse as the Tao of talking. You know, like, how do we get here? Who do we know? How do we get in for free? Who should we know? Who's in the room? You know. So when you enter these like rooms that people are talking in, there's a lot of energy. There's a lingo to learn. And if you've never been in a Clubhouse room, it feels a lot like this.
I really appreciate you having this room. Thank you so much for inviting me on stage. I just want to take a moment to reset the room, No, I love that. Thank you so much. Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I'm just happy to add any insider value to the room. Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, check out my Cash App.
So Christian, that TikTok was from a guy named Gregory Litley, and I actually met him in a Clubhouse he was moderating. And I have to say, he's nailing what it feels like to be in this new space. There is just so much etiquette that you got to learn before you walk in.
So is it like audio LinkedIn? I mean, like what are people using this for?
You know, Christian, this is a solid question from an elder millennial like yourself. I'm sure you're really confused, you're disoriented, you don't know what's going on. So I did give Gregory a call and I spoke to him just to learn how to navigate these new waters.
Clubhouse is an audio-based social platform that allows you to connect, create rooms with others based on topics that you want to talk about. And create community around those type of conversations. So you can have conversations about trending topics in society. You can talk about politics, or you can talk about, you know, more of a professional setting.
Is there anything to compare it to, or is this its own new original thing?
You can compare it to the idea of a podcast with an audience, but it is unique, it is original, and I think that's also why we're seeing more traditional social media platforms pop up and try to create or mimic and translate that feature to their own platforms.
So Christian, the growth of Clubhouse is noteworthy. You know, according to the LA Times, around the new year, there was about 1 million users. Today, that's grown to more than 10 million. So it is truly taking off.
A lot of people talking about nothing on Clubhouse using Robert's Rules of Order just to have a conversation.
That's true. Okay, so there are quite the range of rooms you can go into. Okay, so I'm not going to say people are talking about nothing, but you got to figure out why you want to use the app. Are you trying to network? Are you trying to kill some time? Are you trying to meet someone? You know, I have found that you could do all of those things and more. It's just, I think if you go in, it's best to go in with a focus of what you're trying to achieve.
Cody LeGros, thanks so much for giving us the 411 during our TikTok Tuesday.
Yes.
We'll see you next week, man.
We'll see you next week.
All right, signing off TikTok for at least the next week. When you're back, we'll tell you why some residents in Minneapolis are insulted by some of the city's preparations ahead of the Derek Chauvin trial. Jury selection in the Derek Chauvin trial is back underway after a brief pause. Ahead of the trial, the city of Minneapolis erected fencing around police precincts, city hall, and other government buildings. The city's police chief calls it preventative, but activists and other residents see it as an insult. Newsy's Jamal Andrus has more from Minneapolis.
In preparation for the trial of Derek Chauvin, the city of Minneapolis and the surrounding county has spent upwards of $1 million on fencing, barricades, and barbed wire.
Some in our communities may find some of the environmental structures that they see, barricades and barriers and fences, perhaps a little bit daunting.
But for some in Minneapolis, the fencing feels less like a precaution and more like an indictment of the city's residents.
What do you think this says to the community more broadly?
It says we don't trust you. We don't trust you to gather together as a community and to express your grief and frustration.
Andrew Gordon works with the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis, giving free legal representation to community members.
No justice, no peace.
For the past several years, he's represented protesters in Minneapolis in the aftermath of controversial police killings.
You were here for Jamar Clark, you were here for Philando Castile, and obviously George Floyd. Did those separate incidents build into what we saw this past summer?
You had folks who were on the streets on principle. You also had black protesters who could easily put themselves in the shoes of a George Floyd or of someone like Philando Castile or someone like Jamar Clark. And for them, the act of protest was an act of processing. And not just to process it, but to do so in a shared collective venue, right? I'm not alone in feeling this grief. Here are all the people who may not know me who also share in that.
The city would say, I would imagine, that we lost a precinct. There were bad actors who came out every night and caused the havoc. This is not for peaceful protesters. What would be your response to that argument from the city?
You can protect property, and property should be protected. This protects this property. Let's say you want to ensure that people are coming out and they're protesting and that protest is meaningful and it's peaceful, then talk to the people who are going to protest. Find out why, for example, they may turn violent.
Governor Tim Walz listed the total cost of damages from the unrest last summer at $500 million and believes nearly 1,500 businesses were impacted by looting, fire, or vandalism. Now, the city has 6 different law enforcement agencies focused on this trial, including roughly 2,000 National Guard troops stationed in the city. Despite the additional security, activists in Minneapolis have plans to protest throughout the trial. Gordon says George Floyd's death and Derek Chauvin's trial stands out amongst the police killings he's seen over the years.
The video seemed to show an individual who just didn't care that George Floyd was a person. And the things you fall back on, okay, the officer was scared for their safety, the officers were scared because a person had a gun or a knife, or they were rushing them or charging them. It just wasn't true here. And so because you couldn't fall back on a narrative and you doubled down on the callousness, I think that's why you saw the response you did.
Jamal Andrus, Newsy, Minneapolis.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us and offer up your feedback on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. We'll probably keep this hashtag once we transition to a live studio audience, so don't you want to be able to say, I was there when it was just him in an empty newsroom? The U.S. government is currently detaining a record number of unaccompanied migrant children. This comes as the Biden administration tries to find space for a growing number of migrants seeking asylum at the U.S. southern border. One way they're dealing with that, reopening facilities holding migrant children to pre-pandemic levels. CNN's Ed Lavandera has more.
This week, Father Roy Snipes has welcomed about 100 migrant families a night to seek shelter in this South Texas church, overflowing from another shelter down the road. No longer are migrant children being separated from their parents. These families are allowed to wait in the United States for their asylum cases to be heard in court. We met 21-year-old Kenya. The shelter asked that we protect her identity. She left Honduras 2 weeks ago with her son and crossed the Rio Grande into the U.S. a few nights before.
¿Qué decidió venir ahora? Why did you decide to come now?
La verdad que solo estaba esperando cuando escuché así que iban a haber oportunidades y todo eso.
Many migrants are still being turned away at the southern border, but the growing reality for the Biden administration is that there's a perception in Central American countries ravaged by crime and natural disasters that it's now easier to make the journey north and cross the border. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas insists this isn't a crisis, but a challenge.
We are working as hard as we are, not only in addressing the urgency of the challenge, but also in building the capacity to manage it and to meet our humanitarian aspirations and execution of the president's vision.
The numbers of migrants arriving at the southern border is growing. In January, Customs and Border Protection reported about 7,500 families were taken into custody and 5,800 unaccompanied children. During a major surge exactly 2 years ago, Border Patrol encountered 5,500 children in 1 month. The Department of Health and Human Services told facilities to open bed space for minors to pre-pandemic levels, which is just under 14,000. There are now about 7,700 children under HHS care, and the concern is that number will rise quickly in the coming weeks.
The way we're going, I think it's going to become a crisis.
Now some Texas Democrats are warning the Biden team about what's unfolding.
They seem to be on a mission, without due respect, to start releasing and show that they're compassionate. I want to be compassionate, but I also think people should be compassionate to our communities on the border.
At the same time, activists are also pressuring Biden to undo what they see as damage from the Trump administration.
People are willing to give them a break in the beginning, but I think that break will soon be over if they don't move very quickly.
In the South Texas shelter, several migrants told us they saw many children traveling to the border alone.
¿Qué edad tenían estos niños? How old were these children that you saw?
11, 12, 13, 14 años más o menos.
Los niños se hacían como si fueran de otra familia para protegerse. They would act like they were part of a family to protect themselves.
Sí.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow for more In the Loop. Same time, same place. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.